The wind howled through the pine trees. Snowflakes drifted down like feathers, covering the mountain in a thick white blanket. Jack Holt sat by the fireplace in his wooden cabin, sipping black coffee from a metal cup. Outside, the cold was biting. Inside, the fire crackled softly, warming the small room. Jack had lived alone in this cabin for 3 years. After his wife died and he quit his job in the city, he came here to escape the noise, the pain, and the memories. He liked the quiet. No one visited, no one called. It was just him, the woods, and the snow. But tonight something felt different. He heard a noise, soft, like footsteps in the snow. Jack set his cup down and stood up slowly. He reached for his old hunting rifle hanging by the door. His fingers moved on instinct. The mountain was peaceful, but sometimes bears or wolves came too close. He opened the door carefully. Cold air rushed in, and the fire hissed behind him. Outside, the night was silent. The snow glowed under the moonlight. Jack stepped out, boots crunching on fresh snow. He scanned the trees, then saw something odd. Footprints. Small ones, too small for a bear or man. They led around the side of the cabin. Jack followed them slowly, rifle lowered but ready. The prints stopped near the high storage shed behind his cabin. He hadn't opened that shed in weeks. As he reached the door, he noticed it wasn't fully closed. Someone, or something, was inside. He raised the rifle, gently pushed the door open, and peeked in. What he saw made him freeze. Huddled in the corner, under a pile of old blankets, was a figure. Not a child, not a human. She looked like a woman, but not from this earth. Her skin was smooth and silver gray. Her long, dark hair clung to her shoulders. Her eyes were large and pale blue, glowing softly in the dark. She wore something like a torn flight suit. Strange symbols covered the fabric. She looked up, saw the rifle, and gasped. Her hands shot up, trembling. Jack lowered his gun quickly. Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, stepping back. "It's okay." She didn't understand. She backed into the wall, eyes wide with fear. Her body shook from cold and exhaustion. Jack placed the rifle against the wall and held up his hands. "See? No weapon," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." Still, she watched him like a trapped animal. Jack stepped outside and went back to the cabin. He returned with a thick blanket and a canteen of water. Slowly, he entered the shed, again, and placed them near her. "Blanket. Water," he said clearly, pointing to each one. She stared at them, then at him. He stepped back and sat down near the door, leaving space between them. The alien woman slowly reached out, grabbed the blanket, and pulled it around herself. Her thin arms were covered in frost. She held the canteen carefully and sniffed it before taking a sip. She drank like she hadn't had water in days. Jack watched quietly. He didn't speak again. He knew fear. He had seen it before, on the battlefield, and later, in his own mirror. After a few minutes, she looked at him again. Her eyes still held fear, but now there was something else, confusion. Why hadn't he hurt her? Why had he brought her warmth? Jack stood up slowly and pointed toward the cabin. "Come inside," he said, then pointed to the warm light shining through the window. "It's safe, warm." She shook her head and pulled the blanket tighter. Jack sighed and nodded. "Okay, you stay. I'll bring food." He left her alone and went back to the cabin. He opened a can of beans, warmed it on the fire, and cut a slice of bread. He put everything in a bowl and walked back to the shed. This time, she watched him closely. When he placed the food near her, she reached out without fear. She sniffed it, then ate slowly. Jack sat again by the door, his arms resting on his knees. For a while, there was only the sound of soft chewing and wind outside. Then she said something, a single word. Strange, soft, musical. Jack looked up. What? She repeated it, this time pointing to herself. Raya. Jack blinked. Raya, is that your name? She nodded slowly. He smiled. Okay, Raya. I'm Jack. He pointed to himself. Jack. Raya looked at him. Jack, he chuckled. Close enough. That night, Jack brought an extra pillow and set up a cot in the cabin for her. But Raya stayed in the shed, too afraid to follow. So Jack left the door open and put a lantern. Outside, so she wouldn't feel alone, he didn't sleep much. In the middle of the night, he heard soft footsteps. Then the sound of the door creaking open. She entered slowly, the blanket still wrapped around her. Her eyes flicked toward him, then the fire. Jack said nothing. He just pulled the blanket on the cot aside. Raya walked to it and lay down carefully, facing the wall. Jack smiled faintly and closed his eyes. By morning, the snow was deeper, but something else had changed. Raya had stayed. She hadn't run away. Jack didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what had brought her here, but he knew one thing clearly now. She was scared, not dangerous. And if someone like her could crash on Earth and fear him, then maybe humans still had something to prove, to themselves and to the stars. The morning sun touched the snow-covered trees, casting golden light on the mountain cabin. Inside, the fire still burned low. Jack stirred awake, wrapped in a warm blanket, hearing soft movements near the fireplace. He opened his eyes slowly. Raya was kneeling beside the fire, holding a piece of bread carefully in her hands. Her silver-gray skin glowed in the morning light. She looked at Jack with quiet eyes, less afraid than the night before. Jack sat up. Morning. Raya looked at him but didn't answer. She held the bread close like it was something precious. Jack smiled and stood up, stretching. He walked to the small kitchen corner and opened a cabinet. He pointed to the canned food. Food, he said. Raya tilted her head. He took out a can of fruit, opened it with a twist, and poured some into a bowl. He handed it to her. Sweet, he said. She sniffed it, then tasted. Her eyes widened, and she smiled for the first time. Jack laughed. Told you? Raya touched her chest. Raya, she said softly. Jack nodded and pointed to himself. Jack, Jack, she repeated with a light voice. They sat by the fire, sharing fruit and bread. Jack tried simple words, fire, food, water, sleep, and pointed to things. Raya watched carefully, repeating each word. She was quick to learn. Later that afternoon, Jack pulled out an old sketch pad and pencil. He drew a mountain, a cabin, and a small figure himself. Home, he said, pointing to the cabin. Raya nodded. He turned the page and drew another figure. He gave it long hair and silver skin. He pointed to her. Raya! She nodded again, then took the pencil. Her fingers moved with skill. In a few moments, she drew a strange shape. An oval-shaped ship, cracked and smoking, lying in the forest. She circled it and pointed outside. Jack leaned in. Your ship? She nodded, face turning serious. Jack drew a tree beside the ship, then another shape, humanoids with sharp armor and weapons. He pointed to them and raised an eyebrow. Raya's smile vanished. She pointed to the soldiers, then made a motion across her neck. She tapped her chest and shook her head. Jack understood. They're hunting you. She nodded slowly. Jack closed the sketch pad, his mind racing. Raya wasn't just lost. She was in danger, and that meant trouble could come to his doorstep soon. Still, he didn't feel fear. He felt protective. The days that followed, Jack helped Raya recover. He gave her better clothes, his late wife's old hiking gear, and strong boots. She looked odd wearing human clothes, but she smiled softly when she zipped up the jacket. She followed him around during the day, watching as he chopped wood, fixed the roof, or checked the traps. Sometimes she tried helping, though her movements were unsure. He built her a small sleeping area inside the cabin with blankets and a pillow. At night, they sat by the fire. Jack spoke slowly, and Raya repeated words. They laughed often. Sometimes, they just sat in silence, watching the flames dance. But the peaceful days didn't last. One morning, Jack was chopping firewood behind the cabin when he heard a faint buzzing sound overhead. He looked up and froze. A small black drone hovered above the treetops, blinking with red lights. It wasn't his, and it definitely wasn't human-made. Jack dropped the axe and ran inside. "Raya!" he shouted. She was already standing by the window, staring up at the sky. Her face had gone pale. The drone hovered for a few more seconds, then zipped away into the clouds. Jack closed the door and locked it. "They found you." Raya nodded. She grabbed the sketch pad again and drew more. Strange alien symbols and a map showing the valley trees and a glowing circle. She pointed to the circle. "Pod?" Jack guessed. "Yes," she said. "Pod. Hide. Her escape pod. It must still be out there." Jack grabbed his backpack, flashlight, and rifle. "Show me." Into the forest. They moved fast through the snowy woods, following a narrow trail that twisted between thick trees. Raya led the way, her movements more confident now. She seemed to know every rock and turn, like she had memorized the terrain from the sky. After 2 hours of walking, they reached a fallen tree. Beneath it, hidden under branches and snow, was a metallic shape, dull gray, scratched and half-buried. Raya crouched beside it, brushed snow off a panel, and pressed a glowing button. The hatch opened with a hiss. Jack stared into the pod. Inside were blinking lights, shattered screens, and a strange control panel. Raya climbed inside and picked up a small glowing cube. She handed it to Jack. He held it up. "What is it?" She pointed to the cube, then to the sky. "Signal." "A beacon?" Jack asked. She shook her head. "No send. Bad. Track." Jack understood. If the beacon activated, her enemies would find them. Then she pointed at herself. "Run." Jack frowned. "Alone?" She nodded. "No way," he said firmly. "You're not running by yourself." Raya's eyes softened. She reached out and touched his arm gently. "Jack, help." "But danger." He smiled. "Yeah, I've seen danger before." The watchers return. They returned to the cabin by nightfall. The drone didn't return that evening, but Jack had a feeling. It would soon. He took inventory of his supplies, ammo, canned food, ropes, tools. Not much, but enough to last a few days if they had to run. Raya sat by the fire, holding the glowing cube, staring into the flames. She looked at Jack and said softly, "Why?" "Why what?" he asked. "Why help me?" she said, her English slow but clear. Jack thought for a moment, then answered, "Because you were scared, and I've been scared too. No one should face that alone." Raya stared at him, her eyes deep and shining. "You, human," she said, placing her hand over his chest. "Good." Jack chuckled. "I try." Outside, the wind picked up again, howling through the trees, and high above, far beyond the clouds, something moved. Dark shapes. Waiting, watching. The hunt was not over. Snow fell softly over the mountains. The wind whispered through the tall trees, and the world felt calm. But inside Jack's cabin, there was no peace. Jack stood near the window, watching the sky. His rifle leaned against the wall. Raya sat near, the fireplace, clutching the glowing cube she had taken from her escape pod. Her face looked tense. "They'll come soon," Jack said quietly. Raya nodded. "Yes. Track me." Jack turned away from the window. "Then we don't wait for them to find us. We go to them." Raya looked confused. Go. To them? Jack opened a cabinet and pulled out a thick map of the forest. He placed it on the table and pointed to a wide area deep in the trees. Here, that's where your pod is. If they're looking for you, they'll go there. Raya stood up and walked to the table. Her eyes followed his finger, then looked at him. Trap? Jack gave a small smile. Something like that. A plan in the snow. The next morning, Jack packed his backpack with food, rope, and gear. He wore a thick coat, gloves, and boots. Raya wore his late wife's winter clothes, now layered for warmth and movement. They moved quickly through the forest. Raya led the way again. Her memory of the trail was perfect. They passed the old tree, the frozen stream, and finally reached the place where the pod had crashed. The ship still lay hidden under branches and snow. Jack knelt and began placing traps, old hunting ones from years ago, now modified with ropes, spikes, and even flares. He also placed empty cans on branches, ready to rattle at the slightest movement. Raya watched carefully. Human. Clever. Jack grinned. Sometimes. She pulled out the cube and tapped its surface. The lights blinked, but didn't glow strong. Still not active, she said, but close. Jack looked at her. If we wait here, they'll come, right? She nodded slowly. Yes, soon. He tightened the straps on his backpack. Then we stay low and wait. The sky breaks open by. Evening, they had hidden themselves in the rocky ridge above the crash site. Snow had stopped, and the sky turned dark. Stars blinked overhead, but one of them moved. Jack pointed. There, a sleek, black ship floated silently through the clouds. It didn't roar like human aircraft. It simply glided, quiet, deadly, smooth. Raya's breath caught in her throat. They come. The ship hovered over the trees, then released. A beam of blue light. It scanned the forest below. Moments later, dark shapes dropped from its belly. Soldiers. Jack counted them. 5. No. 6. The soldiers moved like shadows, tall, covered in armor, their faces hidden behind glass. Masks. Each held a long, sharp weapon that buzzed with energy. Their eyes glowed red. Jack whispered, Your friends? Raya shook her head quickly. No. Empire. Jack looked again. These weren't rescuers. These were hunters. The soldiers spread, out in a pattern, scanning the area with blinking devices. One moved closer to the escape pod. As he stepped near the traps, the snow shifted. Snap! The trap closed around his leg with a loud metal crack. The soldier screamed, a short, robotic sound, and fell. The others turned sharply, weapons raised. Jack didn't wait. He raised his rifle, aimed carefully, and fired. Bang! One of the soldiers dropped, his helmet shattered by the bullet. The sound echoed across the mountain. The fight had begun. Run through the ice. The soldiers returned fire. Blue energy blasts struck the trees and rocks. Jack and Raya ducked behind. The ridge. Branches exploded, snow blasted into the air, and the forest lit up with light and noise. Jack grabbed Raya's hand. We have to move! She nodded, and they ran. They weaved through the trees, using the terrain as cover. Jack had hunted in these woods for years. He knew the best paths. But the soldiers were fast. 2 chased after them, their steps heavy, their weapons glowing. Jack tossed a flare behind him. It burst into bright red light, blinding their pursuers for a moment. They reached a narrow pass between cliffs. Jack led Raya through, then kicked down a log trap he had set earlier. The log rolled down the slope and crashed into the path, blocking it. It gave them a few minutes to breathe. They stopped behind a large rock. Raya was panting, but her face was calm. She looked at Jack. You... Strong. He wiped sweat from his forehead. You're doing fine. Suddenly, Raya pulled a small device from her coat. It looked like a silver disc with a red button. She pressed it. A soft hum echoed in the air. Jack looked at her. What did you do? Signal. Allies, she said. Hidden ship. Far. Jack raised an eyebrow. You had that the whole time? Broken, she said. Now, fixed. He gave a relieved laugh. You could have told me earlier, she smiled. You didn't ask. One more stand. The last of the soldiers reached the cliff pass and began climbing over the fallen log. Jack raised his rifle again, but this time, Raya stepped forward. Wait, she said. She pulled a strange tube from her belt and twisted it. It unfolded into a glowing staff with blue energy at its ends. She gripped it firmly and stepped into the open. The soldiers fired. Raya spun the staff like a blade. It blocked the energy blasts, sending them into the trees. She moved fast, too fast for the hunters. Her feet barely touched the snow. With a sharp cry, she leaped at the nearest soldier and struck. The weapon cracked his armor. Another swing knocked the second down. Jack watched, amazed. You're not just a scout. Raya looked back at him, breathless. No, I fight. When needed. The final soldier raised his weapon, but Jack fired one last shot. Clean, sharp. The soldier fell. Silence returned. Smoke drifted in the cold air. The trees stood still. The fight was over, for now. A light in the sky, Jack and Raya returned to the cabin that night, exhausted but alive. The sky above was clear. Raya stood outside the cabin, holding the disc in her hand. She pointed upward. They come. Jack followed her gaze. Far above, a star moved again, but not toward them. It circled, then began to descend. Jack stepped beside her. Your people? She nodded. Yes. He gave a small smile. Took them long enough? She looked at him with warmth. You protect me, even when danger. Jack shrugged. That's what humans do. Or at least, what we should do. Raya stepped closer. She touched his chest gently. Not all humans, but you. Good. Jack didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Above, the stars shifted. Help was on the way. But Jack knew the galaxy had just gotten a taste of what it meant to be human. Kind, brave, and stubborn. And it wasn't done yet. The stars above the cabin glowed brighter that night. One of them wasn't a star at all. It was a ship. Jack could feel it. Raya stood beside him outside, eyes locked on the sky. The small disk in her hand blinked gently, sending out her signal. They are close, she whispered. Jack nodded. Good, because we won't last much longer if more of those soldiers show up. He looked at her side. There was a small burn mark on her coat. She had been grazed during the fight, though she said nothing about it. She was tougher than she looked, maybe tougher than him. Inside the cabin, Jack packed supplies again. Food, tools, maps, ropes. His old army gear still worked, just dusty and tired like him. Raya sat near the fire, holding her weapon and staring at the flames. Your people, Jack asked. Will they come down or wait up there? Raya didn't answer right away. Then she said, If I stay alive, they will come. Jack understood. The signal was a beacon, but not a promise. Traps and trust, the next day, Jack and Raya moved deeper into the mountains. He knew the trails well, old hunting paths, cliffs, and hidden caves. He showed Raya places only he had visited in years. They camped inside a rocky hollow that night. Jack started a small fire and made soup from dried vegetables and canned beans. It wasn't much, but it was hot. While eating, Raya asked a question. Why do you live here? Jack stirred the soup. Too much noise in the city. After I lost my wife, I needed quiet. Raya's eyes softened. You lost someone you love. Jack nodded. Yeah. You? She looked down. My brother. We escaped together. His ship was destroyed. Jack said nothing. He just passed her the bowl of soup. Raya accepted it with a soft, quiet, "Thank you." They didn't speak again that night, but the silence between them felt peaceful, not empty. A storm in the sky, too. Days passed. The blinking light on Raya's disk grew stronger. The air around them felt heavier, like something big was coming. Even the animals in the woods were quiet. Then, just after sunset, the sky cracked open. A massive ship appeared above the forest, black as night and silent as the wind. It floated like a ghost, then slowly lowered behind the hills. A soft blue. Light glowed beneath it. Raya stood and whispered, "They're here." Jack stood beside her, rifle still slung on his shoulder. "Your people?" Raya nodded. "Yes. Rebel fleet scout. Small ship, but strong." Jack smiled. "Then let's go meet them." They walked toward the blue light. But halfway there, the sky behind them lit up again. Another ship. Bigger. Meaner. Not silent. This one screamed across the sky like a monster. Raya's face turned pale. "No, that's not mine." Jack grabbed her hand. "Run!" Mountain War. They ran through the forest as enemy fire lit up the sky. Beams of red light shot from the second ship. Trees exploded. Snow turned to steam. Rocks shattered. The rebel ship responded, firing back with silent, deadly blue pulses. The two ships didn't land. They hovered, fighting high above. But from the enemy ship, more hunters dropped. 10 this time. Heavier armor. Bigger weapons. Jack and Raya reached the entrance of an old mine tunnel, one Jack used long ago for shelter, during storms. He led her inside just before energy blasts slammed into the ground nearby. Inside, it was dark and cold, but safe. For now, Jack lit an old lantern. "We'll hold them here." Raya looked at the narrow entrance. "Too small for all of them to enter at once," Jack grinned. "Exactly. One way in." He handed her a small explosive charge, an old mining tool he had kept. "Place this at the back wall. If we're cornered, we blow the tunnel and seal it." Raya nodded and got to work. Jack prepared his rifle, placed traps near the entrance, and waited. The first hunter entered. A trap snapped. Jack fired. One down. Another followed. Raya spun her staff, blocking blasts and striking hard. 2 more fell, but they kept coming. Jack's shoulder burned from a hit. Raya caught another in the leg. She was fast, graceful, but bleeding now. "Raya!" Jack shouted. "Fall back!" She helped him retreat deeper into the tunnel. Their backs were almost against the wall. She held up the detonator. "Ready?" Jack looked at her, smiled even through the pain. "Let's make it count." She pressed the button. Boom! The tunnel shook as rocks collapsed, sealing the entrance. Dust filled the air. Darkness followed. Light of the stars hours passed. The chi. Sound of battle outside grew quiet. Jack sat against the wall, breathing hard. Blood soaked his coat. His head hurt. He wasn't sure if he could move. Raya knelt beside him, hands glowing softly as she pressed a strange tool to his wound. The pain eased a little. "You'll live," she said quietly. "Too bad," he joked. "I was just getting used to resting." She smiled, but her eyes were full of emotion. "Jack," she whispered, using the name she had always called him. "You gave everything. For me." He looked at her. "You deserved it." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver badge with her people's symbol. She placed it in his hand. "You are now one of us." Jack stared at it. "What does it mean?" "It means," she said, "you are no longer alone." Returned to the surface by morning, the rocks were cleared. Rebel soldiers, humanoid but different from Raya, dug them out. They wore light armor, not heavy like the enemy. Their faces were kind. One helped Jack stand, another offered him a warm drink. Raya spoke in her language to a tall female officer. They talked fast. The officer looked at Jack, then gave him a respectful bow. Later, a small ship landed near the trees. They brought Jack inside and treated his wounds with advanced tech. The officer asked, "Human Jack Holt, you fought to protect one of ours." "Why?" Jack answered. "Because she was scared. And I knew what that felt like." The officer nodded. "Your actions will not be forgotten." Jack looked at Raya across the room. She smiled. For the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like just a man hiding from the world. He felt like part of something bigger. The stars were still out when the rebel ship began to rise. It hovered above the forest like a silent bird, glowing blue under its smooth black wings. Jack stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning against a tall pine tree. His side still hurt. But the bleeding had stopped. The rebels had treated his wounds with some kind of warm gel and strange light. It worked better than any hospital he'd ever seen. Raya stood beside him, her silver skin shining faintly under the ship's light. She wore a new uniform now, one with clean lines and her people's symbol on the shoulder. Her face was calm, but her eyes were heavy. "Your fight is over now," she said quietly. Jack looked at the ship. "Maybe yours too." Raya shook her head. "No. Empire still hunts us, but now we have proof. And a human witness." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Me?" She nodded. "You saw everything. You helped me. You fought." Jack laughed. "I didn't exactly sign up for this." Raya smiled gently. "But you didn't walk away either." Behind them, the rebel officer approached. Her name was Telya, and she had silver eyes like Raya. She carried a small tablet and handed it to Jack. "This is a record of everything," she said. "The Empire's actions, the location of their warship, your defense of our scout." Jack looked at the screen. He didn't understand the symbols, but Raya leaned over and translated softly. "This means the galaxy will hear your story," she said. "What you did will reach others." Jack closed the tablet. "All I did was help someone who needed it." "That," Raya said, "is rare in some parts of the galaxy." A choice among stars, the ramp of the ship lowered slowly, revealing the warm, glowing interior. Other rebel crew members waited inside. One waved at Raya and shouted something in their language. Telya looked at Jack. "You may come with us if you wish. We will not return to this planet soon." Jack stared at the ramp. He thought of the cabin, the firewood he had stacked, the photos of his wife still sitting on the shelf, the quiet mornings with coffee, the sound of snow hitting the roof, and he thought of the stars, of Raya. He took a long breath. "Thank you," he said softly, "but Earth is still my home." Telya gave a short bow. "Then we thank you for defending one of ours." She stepped back. Raya turned to face him. "You could still come," she said. "You would see things no human has seen." Jack smiled. "I believe that, but I think someone needs to stay here, just in case." Raya's voice dropped. "Will I see you again?" He didn't answer right away. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small patch from his old army uniform. It was worn, faded, but still held the Earth flag and the words, "Stand for Others." He placed it in her hand. "This is for you," he said. "So you don't forget who helped you." Raya looked at the patch for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and hugged him. Her arms were warm. Her voice was low in his ear. "I won't forget." The departure Raya stepped onto the ramp. The ship lights glowed brighter. Jack backed away as the ramp slowly rose, sealing shut. The engines hummed softly, no louder than the wind in the trees. Snowflakes began to fall again. The ship rose into the air, slowly at first, then faster. Jack watched it vanish through the clouds. A streak of blue light marked its path across the sky. Then it was gone. The mountain was silent once more. Jack stood for a long time, his boots buried in the snow, looking at the stars. returned to the cabin. A week passed. Jack returned to his normal life, or what was left of it. The cabin was quiet again, but something inside him had changed. He repaired the shed, cleared the debris near the escape pod site, and buried the bodies of the fallen hunters under a tall pine tree. He carved a small stone and wrote simply, "Here." They failed to break a bond of trust. He cleaned the cabin and fixed the window that had shattered during the fight. He even opened his wife's old journal again and read a few pages. But at night, he often stood outside looking at the stars and wondering. A message from the void one morning, as he was chopping wood, a soft beep echoed from inside the cabin. Jack rushed in, confused. On the table where the rebel crew had left a black cube-shaped device. The lights were blinking. He tapped it gently. A small projection lit up in the air. Raya's face appeared, smiling. "Jack," her voice said, "we made it. The message was received by Rebel Command. The Empire is pulling back. You gave them fear. You gave us hope." Her image flickered slightly, then continued. "I miss Earth's sky. I miss your fire and your terrible canned beans." Jack laughed. "I will return one day," she said. "And when I do, I'll bring better food." The message ended with a quiet tone. The lights on the cube dimmed. Jack sat down, holding the cube gently. "I'll be here," he whispered. A new purpose days passed, and life on Earth moved on. But Jack was no longer just a man in the mountains. Now sometimes he would hike to a high cliff and place mirrors to flash light into the sky at night. Simple signals, Morse code, human hello, and sometimes far above a small flicker would answer back. Not always, but just enough to say, "You are not alone." Jack Holt had once lived to escape the world. Now he lived knowing the universe had seen Earth's kindness. Not from armies, not from politicians, but from one man in one cabin who chose not to be afraid of someone different. And because of that, the stars had remembered.